The sound of 3 desperate knocks against weathered wood shattered the silence of the Colorado night. And John Oakley knew before he even rose from his chair that whoever stood on the other side of his door carried trouble like a shadow. He had been sitting alone in his small ranch house just outside Florissant, nursing a glass of whiskey and watching the fire burn low in the stone hearth. The clock on the mantel showed midnight, far too late for friendly visits in this isolated stretch of high country. His hand instinctively moved toward the revolver on his hip as he crossed the room, boots echoing on the wooden floorboards. The knocking came again, more urgent this time, and he could hear ragged breathing on the other side of the door. When he pulled it open, gun drawn and ready, he found himself face to face with a woman who looked like she had ridden through hell itself to reach his doorstep. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around her face, and her riding dress was torn at the hem and covered in dust. Blood stained her sleeve, though whether it was hers or someone else's, he could not immediately tell. But it was her eyes that stopped him from asking questions right away. They were green as spring grass, and filled with a desperate kind of courage that he recognized in soldiers and survivors. "Please," she gasped, one hand gripping the door frame to steady herself. "I need help. They are looking for me and I have nowhere else to go." John holstered his weapon and reached out to steady her as she swayed on her feet. "Come inside, quickly." She stumbled over the threshold, and he caught her before she could fall, feeling how she trembled beneath his hands. He kicked the door shut behind them and guided her to the chair he had just vacated, lowering her into it with more gentleness than he had shown another person in years. Living alone did that to a man, made him forget how to be careful with fragile things. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside the chair to examine her more closely in the firelight. "Not badly," she said, though her voice shook. "The blood is not mine. It belonged to my horse. They shot her out from under me about 2 miles back. I ran the rest of the way here on foot." "Who shot your horse?" Her jaw tightened, and he saw a flash of fury cross her face. "Men who work for my stepfather. He wants me brought back to his ranch whether I am willing or not." John rose to his feet and moved to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain to peer out into the darkness. The moon hung heavy and full in the sky, casting silver light across his land, illuminating the empty pastures and the distant line of pine trees that marked the edge of his property. He saw no riders, heard no hoofbeats, but that did not mean they were not out there searching. "What is your name?" he asked, turning back to face her. "Faith," she said. "Faith Drummond. John Oakley." He moved away from the window and added another log to the fire, watching sparks dance up the chimney. "Why does your stepfather want you back so badly that he would send men to hunt you down in the middle of the night?" Faith wrapped her arms around herself, and he noticed for the first time that she was shivering despite the warmth of the room. He grabbed a blanket from the back of the sofa and draped it across her shoulders, his fingers barely brushing her collarbone as he did so. She looked up at him with those striking green eyes, and he felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in so long he almost did not recognize it. "He arranged a marriage for me," she said quietly. "To a man named Victor Harding. Do you know him?" John's expression darkened. "I know of him. He owns the biggest cattle operation in 3 counties and has a reputation for being cruel to his ranch hands and anyone else who crosses him. He is also twice your age if I am judging correctly." 3 times my age," Faith corrected bitterly. "I am 20 years old, and he is 60 if he is a day. My stepfather owes him money from a bad business deal, and I am the payment. They plan to marry us tomorrow morning, whether I agreed or not. So tonight, I took my horse and ran." The fire crackled in the silence that followed her words. John studied her face, noting the determined set of her jaw, and the way she held herself upright despite her exhaustion. She was not the first woman he had encountered who had been bartered like livestock by men who should have protected her, but something about her spirit called to something deep within him that he thought had died years ago. "You can stay here tonight," he said finally. "I have a spare room. In the morning, we will figure out what to do next." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you. I did not know where else to go. I remembered hearing that a man named Oakley lived out this way, that he kept to himself and did not involve himself in other people's business. I hoped that meant you might help someone who needed to disappear for a while. How did you hear about me?" "I volunteer at the church in Florissant sometimes. The Reverend's wife mentioned you once, said you were a good man who had lost someone and chosen solitude rather than company. She worried about you being alone." John felt his jaw tighten. He did not like being discussed, even in sympathetic terms, but he supposed it was inevitable in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's history. "The Reverend's wife talks too much." "She meant well," Faith said softly. "And she was right. You are helping me when you could have turned me away." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. "No decent man would turn away a woman in trouble. Let me look at that arm." She glanced down at her sleeve as if she had forgotten about the blood. "It really is not mine. Humor me." Faith hesitated, then unwrapped the blanket from her shoulders and began rolling up her sleeve. John fetched a basin of water from the kitchen and a clean cloth, then returned to kneel beside her chair once more. Her arm was unmarked except for a few scratches from running through brush, and he cleaned them carefully, aware of how close they were, how he could smell the scent of sage and night air clinging to her hair. "You were lucky," he said, focusing on the task at hand rather than the way his pulse had quickened. "I know." When he finished bandaging the scratches, he stood and carried the basin back to the kitchen, taking a moment to steady himself. He had lived alone in this house for 3 years, ever since returning from his wandering after the war. He had chosen this isolated patch of land specifically because it allowed him to avoid complications, to avoid feeling anything at all. And now here was this woman, bringing chaos and danger right to his doorstep. And instead of resenting the intrusion, he found himself wanting to know everything about her. He returned to the main room to find Faith standing at the window where he had stood earlier, peering out into the darkness with watchful eyes. "You think they followed me here?" she asked without turning around. "If they did, they would have already tried to break down the door. My guess is you lost them somewhere in the darkness, but they will be looking again at first light. Then I should leave before dawn. I will not bring trouble to your home." "You will do no such thing," John said firmly. "You are exhausted, you are on foot, and you have nowhere to go. Running now would be suicide." She turned to face him, and he saw tears glistening in her eyes though she blinked them back stubbornly. "I cannot ask you to put yourself at risk for me. You do not even know me." "That is true, but I know Victor Harding and men like your stepfather. I know what happens to women who have no one to stand with them. And I know that if I let you walk out that door tonight, I would never forgive myself." He paused, then added more gently, "Besides, I have not had a conversation with another person in 3 months. The least you can do is stay and talk to me until sunrise." A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, the first he had seen from her. "That seems like a fair trade." "Sit," he said, gesturing back to the chair. "Are you hungry?" "Starving, actually. I left in such a hurry I did not think to bring food." He moved to the kitchen and returned with bread, cheese, and cold chicken left over from his supper. Faith ate with the focused intensity of someone who had not realized how hungry she was until food appeared in front of her, and he found himself smiling as he watched her. When she finally slowed down, looking slightly embarrassed, He poured her a glass of water and settled into the chair across from her. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "How did you end up in Colorado territory with a stepfather cruel enough to sell you to Victor Harding?" Faith wrapped her hands around the water glass, staring into it as if reading tea leaves. "My mother and I came west 5 years ago after my father died of influenza in Philadelphia. She wanted a fresh start, and she had a sister who had married a rancher outside Florissant. We moved into a small house in town, and Mother took in sewing to support us. I was 15 then, and everything felt like an adventure. The mountains, the wild country, the freedom of it all. What happened to change that? Mother met Thomas Drummond 2 years after we arrived. He seemed kind at first, attentive and generous. He owned a medium-sized ranch and had lost his first wife to childbirth years before. He courted Mother properly, and they married when I was 17. For the first year, things were good. He gave us a home on his ranch, and Mother was happy. Then she got sick. Faith's voice caught, and John remained silent, giving her time to collect herself. "It was consumption," she continued. "It took her slowly over the course of 18 months. By the end, she could barely breathe without coughing blood." Thomas grew distant as she declined, spending more time in town gambling and drinking. "I nursed Mother myself, watched her waste away. She died last winter and everything changed." "How so?" Without Mother there, Thomas stopped pretending to be decent. He had gambled away most of his money, made bad investments, borrowed from dangerous men. Victor Harding offered him a solution to his debts and a business partnership if Thomas could arrange the marriage. "I was the arrangement." Her voice hardened. "Thomas told me I should be grateful. That marrying a rich man, even an old cruel one, was the best a girl like me could hope for. When I refused, he locked me in my room and said I would come around or he would drag me to the church himself." "So you escaped?" "I escaped," she confirmed. "I waited until everyone was asleep, climbed out my window, and took one of the horses from the stable. I knew they would chase me, but I did not care. I would rather die free than live as Victor Harding's wife." John felt anger building in his chest, a hot, righteous fury at men who treated women as property to be traded and sold. He had seen too much of that in his life, too much suffering caused by those with power over those without it. "You will not have to do either," he said. "We will find another way." "What other way is there?" "Thomas is my legal guardian until I turn 21. He has the law on his side, and Victor Harding has money and influence. Who would believe me over them?" "I would," John said simply. "And I am not without resources myself." Faith studied him in the firelight, her expression searching. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You owe me nothing." It was a fair question, one he was not entirely sure how to answer. He rose from his chair and moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames as he tried to put his feelings into words. 3 years ago, I came home from wandering after the war ended to find my wife had died of fever while I was gone. I had left her with promises to return, and I did, but too late. She was already buried in the churchyard, and the life we were supposed to build together was gone." He paused, his throat tight with old grief. "I swore then that I would never again stand by and do nothing when I had the power to help someone. So when you knocked on my door tonight, desperate and alone, there was never any question about what I would do." The silence stretched between them, comfortable now rather than awkward. Faith rose from her chair and came to stand beside him at the fire, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "I am sorry about your wife," she said softly. "What was her name?" "Sarah. She was lucky to have someone love her so much. I was the lucky one." He turned to look at Faith and found her already watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Tell me more about yourself. What did you do before all this happened? What are your hopes and dreams beyond escaping an unwanted marriage?" A light came into her eyes that transformed her face. "I love horses. I know that must sound strange, given that one was just shot out from under me, but I have always felt more at peace in a stable than anywhere else. I used to help train the horses on my stepfather's ranch before Mother died. I have a gift for it, or so the hands used to tell me. I can gentle even the most nervous animal, help them trust again after they have been mistreated. That is a valuable skill. It is one I will never get to use if I am married off to Victor Harding. He believes women belong in the house, managing servants and hosting parties. He would never allow me to work with horses." John found himself imagining Faith in his own stable, working with the 3 horses he kept. The image felt right in a way that made his chest ache. He pushed the thought aside, reminding himself that she had just escaped one man trying to control her future. She did not need another one making plans without her input. "What about you?" Faith asked. "What brought you to Colorado territory?" "You said you were wandering after the war, but what made you stop here?" "I fought for the Union," he said. "Spent 4 years seeing things no man should have to see, doing things I still have nightmares about. When it ended, I could not go back to Ohio where I grew up. Everything there reminded me of who I was before the war, and that man did not exist anymore. So I drifted west, picking up work where I could find it, trying to outrun my memories. Did it work? No, you cannot outrun what lives inside your head. But eventually, I met Sarah at a church social in Missouri, and she gave me a reason to stop running. We married after a 3-month courtship and decided to come west together, start a ranch where we could build something new. We made it as far as Florissant before our money ran out, so we bought this land and started building. I did occasional work as a ranch hand and guard for stage lines to earn extra money, and Sarah started making the house into a home. He could see it all so clearly in his mind, those brief happy months when he thought he had finally found peace. Then a stage line offered me good money to ride guard on a route into Kansas. The job would take 3 months, but the pay would be enough to buy more cattle and expand the ranch. Sarah encouraged me to go, said she would be fine, that 3 months would pass quickly. I left in early spring and came back in midsummer to find she had died 6 weeks before. "You could not have known," Faith said gently, "but I should have been here. I should have been with her." He shook his head, trying to dispel the old guilt. "Afterward, I could not bring myself to leave this place, even though every corner of it reminds me of her. I work the ranch alone, keep to myself, and try to honor her memory by living well. It is not much of a life, but it is mine." "It sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted, "but loneliness feels safer than risking that kind of loss again." Faith reached out and placed her hand on his arm, the touch light but grounding. "I understand. After watching my mother die slowly while my stepfather grew cruel and distant, I promised myself I would never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. I would rather be alone than trapped." They stood together by the fire, 2 damaged souls who had found each other by accident in the middle of the night. John felt something shifting inside him, old walls beginning to crack. He looked down at Faith's hand on his arm, then up at her face, and saw his own loneliness reflected back at him. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked, his voice rough. "If we are staying up until sunrise, we should probably keep ourselves awake." Faith smiled, and the expression lit her entire face. "Coffee sounds wonderful." He moved to the kitchen and set about making a fresh pot, grateful for the activity to occupy his hands. Through the doorway, he could see Faith settling back into the chair by the fire, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. She looked like she belonged there, and that thought both terrified and exhilarated him. When the coffee was ready, He poured 2 cups and returned to the main room. He handed one to Faith and settled into his own chair, stretching his long legs toward the fire. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the corners of the house and making the windows rattle in their frames. "Tell me about your horses," Faith said, wrapping both hands around the warm cup. "How many do you have?" "3. A gelding named Thunder that I use for ranch work, a mare named Penny who is getting old but still has spirit, and a young stallion named Smoke who has more energy than sense. I bought him cheap last year from a rancher who could not handle him, thought I could train him up and sell him for profit. But he has proven more stubborn than I expected. What is wrong with him? He spooks at everything, refuses to be saddled half the time, and once threw me so hard I could not sit properly for a week. The rancher I bought him from admitted after the sale that the horse had been mistreated by his previous owner. Someone beat him regularly, used spurs too harshly. Now he does not trust anyone." Faith's expression grew thoughtful. "I could help with that if you wanted. Working with damaged horses is what I do best. You would do that. I would enjoy it, actually. It would give me something useful to do while we figure out what comes next." She paused, then added quietly, "And it would give me a reason to stay, at least for a little while." John felt his heart kick against his ribs. The idea of Faith staying, of seeing her face across the breakfast table and hearing her voice in the evening, filled him with a longing so intense it almost frightened him. But he forced himself to think practically, to consider the complications. "If you stay, Thomas and his men will eventually come looking here. I have kept to myself enough that most people do not think of me, but they will check every ranch within riding distance of Florissant eventually. Then we tell them you have not seen me," Faith said. "I could stay hidden when anyone comes by, and you could truthfully say no one has knocked on your door asking for shelter. Lying by omission is still lying. You have a moral objection to lying to men who hunt women like animals," he smiled despite himself. "When you put it that way, no. But I want you to understand the risk. If they find you here, they will assume I am helping you, and there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "Victor Harding is a vindictive man. He could make trouble for me, spread rumors that damage my reputation and my ability to do business. Or he could take more direct action. He has men who work for him that do not shy away from violence." Faith bit her lip, clearly torn. "Maybe I should leave after all. I do not want to put you in danger." "Too late," John said. "The moment I let you through that door, I chose a side. And I am not in the habit of changing my mind." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Besides, I am not without defenses. I have my guns, I know this land better than anyone else, and I have friends in town who would stand with me if it came to trouble. We will manage. You have friends." "You said you keep to yourself." "I do. But there are a few good men I served with during the war who settled in this area. We do not socialize much, but we watch each other's backs when needed. And the Reverend, despite his wife's tendency to gossip, is a decent man who does not approve of forced marriages. We have options if we need them." Faith relaxed slightly, the tension easing from her shoulders. "Thank you. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. You are giving me something I have not had in a long time." "What is that?" "Hope." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind outside. John found his gaze drawn to Faith again and again, memorizing the curve of her cheek in the firelight, the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, the quick intelligence in her eyes when she looked at him. "Can I ask you something personal?" Faith said eventually. "You can ask." "I reserve the right not to answer." What was Sarah like? He had not spoken about his wife to anyone in 3 years, had kept her memory locked away like a precious treasure too fragile to expose to the world. But something about the quiet intimacy of this night, the way Faith watched him with genuine interest rather than pity, made him want to share. She was small, he said. Barely came up to my shoulder, but she had a fierce spirit that made her seem 10 feet tall when she was angry about something. She grew up on a farm in Missouri, the youngest of 6 children, and she was not afraid of hard work. When we bought this land, she worked beside me building fences and clearing brush. Her hands were always covered in calluses and scrapes, but she never complained. She sounds strong. She was. But she was also gentle, especially with animals and children. We talked about having a family someday, filling this house with noise and life. She would have been a wonderful mother. His throat tightened. When I came back and found her grave, I learned from the neighbors that she had helped deliver a baby for a woman in town just before she fell sick. She caught the fever from that family and was dead within a week. She died doing something kind for someone else, which seems fitting somehow. "You still love her," Faith said softly. "It was not a question. I always will. But I have learned that love does not end just because someone is gone. It changes, becomes something you carry with you rather than something you share. Sarah would not want me to stop living because she died. She would want me to find joy again, to open myself to new possibilities." He looked directly at Faith. "I think she would have liked you." Faith's eyes shimmered with tears. "I wish I could have met her." "So do I." The clock on the mantel chimed 2, the sound echoing through the quiet house. John rose and added another log to the fire, then moved to the window again to check outside. The moon had shifted position in the sky, and the landscape looked different in its light, familiar and strange at once. "Tell me more about working with horses," he said, returning to his chair. "How did you learn to train them?" Faith's face brightened, and she launched into stories about her experiences with difficult horses, describing techniques she had learned through trial and error and careful observation. John found himself captivated not just by what she said, but by how she said it, the passion in her voice and the grace of her gestures as she described the process of earning an animal's trust. "It is all about patience and consistency," she explained. "Horses that have been mistreated need to learn that not all humans will hurt them. You have to approach them calmly, speak softly, and never make sudden movements. You reward the smallest positive behaviors and never, ever punish out of anger. It can take weeks or even months, but eventually they start to understand that you are safe." "That sounds like it requires a special kind of temperament." "It requires genuine caring," Faith said. "Horses can sense if you are being false with them. They respond to authenticity, to people who see them as individuals rather than tools. That is what most people get wrong. They think training a horse is about domination, breaking their spirit until they submit. But the best partnerships between humans and horses are built on mutual respect and trust." John thought about Smoke, still wild and frightened in the stable, and felt hope kindle in his chest. "Would you really be willing to work with my stallion?" "I would love to," Faith said. "I miss it more than I realized until just now. Being around horses, helping them heal, it made me feel useful. It gave me purpose. After Mother died and Thomas changed, I lost access to that part of my life." He said it was not appropriate for his stepdaughter to be working in the stables like a common ranch hand. "That is foolish. A person's skills should be valued, not dismissed because of arbitrary rules about what is appropriate. You would think so, but most men see it differently." "I am not most men," Faith smiled. "I am beginning to realize that." They talked on as the night deepened around them, sharing stories and opinions and bits of themselves that neither had shown to anyone else in a long time. John told her about his childhood in Ohio, growing up on a small farm with 3 brothers, and how the war had scattered them to different corners of the country. Faith described her girlhood in Philadelphia, the excitement of city life and the culture shock of moving to the Colorado territory where the nearest neighbor was miles away. "Did you ever regret coming west?" John asked. "Not until Thomas showed his true colors," Faith said. "But even then, I never wanted to go back to Philadelphia. For all its challenges, there is something about this place that feels like freedom. The mountains, the endless sky, the sense that you can become anyone you want to be rather than who society says you should be. I just wanted the chance to discover who that person was on my own terms. And now I am sitting in a stranger's house at 2 in the morning, drinking coffee and talking about horses and dead spouses, and it feels like the most honest conversation I have had in years." She shook her head, laughing softly. "If you had told me this morning that this is where I would end up, I never would have believed you." "Life has a way of surprising us," John said. "Sometimes those surprises are terrible, but sometimes they turn out to be exactly what we needed." Faith met his eyes across the small space between their chairs, and he felt the air between them change, becoming charged with unspoken possibility. He wanted to reach out and take her hand, to close the distance and see if her lips were as soft as they looked. But he held himself back, remembering that she had just escaped one man trying to control her life. The last thing she needed was another man pushing for intimacy before she was ready. Instead, he rose and went to the kitchen, returning with the coffee pot to refill their cups. As he poured, Faith spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Can I tell you something that might sound strange? After the night we have had, I doubt anything would sound strange. I feel safe here," she said. "I know I only met you a few hours ago, and I know I should be more cautious, but something about you makes me feel like I can breathe properly for the first time in months." "Is that foolish?" John settled back into his chair, cradling his cup in both hands. "I do not think it is foolish. Sometimes you meet someone and just know deep in your gut that they are trustworthy. I felt that way about Sarah when we first met. I felt it about my closest army friends, and I feel it about you." "You do." "I do. You knocked on my door desperate and afraid, but you did not lie to me or try to manipulate me. You were honest about your situation and your needs. You asked for help rather than demanding it. And you have shown genuine interest in my life and my losses without trying to fix me or tell me how I should feel. Those things tell me more about your character than weeks of acquaintance might." Faith looked down at her cup, her cheeks flushing pink. "I like you, John Oakley. I probably should not say that so directly, but it is true. I like the way you listen, really listen, instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. I like that you have known grief and come through it without becoming bitter. I like your quiet strength and your willingness to help someone who has nothing to offer you in return." "You have plenty to offer," John said quietly. "Your company, your stories, your knowledge about horses, the way you make this house feel less empty just by being in it." They looked at each other for a long moment, and John felt his heart beating hard against his ribs. He wanted to say more, to tell her that in just a few hours she had awakened something in him that he thought had died with Sarah. But the words felt too large, too soon, so he simply smiled and raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "To unexpected meetings," he said. Faith raised her own cup, returning his smile. "To new possibilities." They drank, and the moment passed into something more comfortable, though the awareness between them remained. John glanced at the window and saw that the sky was beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly at the edges, the deep black fading to dark blue. "Dawn is still a couple hours away," he said. "What should we talk about next?" "Tell me about your ranch," Faith said. "What are your plans for it? What do you hope to build here?" It was a question no one had asked him in 3 years, and he realized with a start that he did not have a good answer. After Sarah died, he had simply maintained the ranch, doing the minimum necessary to keep it running without really thinking about the future. But now, with Faith looking at him with genuine interest, he found himself imagining possibilities again. "I have good grazing land," he said slowly, thinking out loud. "Enough to support a larger herd than I currently run. I have been thinking about buying more cattle, maybe breeding horses as well. There is growing demand for good working horses as more people settle in the territory. If I had someone with real skill at training difficult animals, I could buy problem horses cheap and sell them for profit after they were gentled." "That sounds like a solid plan," Faith said. "And horse breeding can be very profitable if you develop a reputation for quality. What would you need to make it happen?" "Capital to buy initial stock, time to train the horses, and someone who knows what they are doing to handle the training program." He paused, then added carefully, "It would also help to have a partner, someone with as much invested in the ranch's success as I am." Faith's eyes widened slightly, and he could see her quick mind working through the implications of his words. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you options," John said. "You could work here as a horse trainer, earning wages and building your skills while staying out of sight of your stepfather and Victor Harding. Or, if you wanted something more permanent, we could form a real partnership. You bring your knowledge and labor, I provide the land and initial capital, and we split the profits. Either way, you would have a place to stay and work that is yours by right rather than by the grace of some man's charity. You would trust me that much. You only met me tonight." Sometimes a few hours of honest conversation tell you more about a person than years of casual acquaintance. You are smart, skilled, hard-working, and honest. Those are the qualities that matter in a business partner. The rest we can figure out as we go. Faith set down her coffee cup and stood, moving to the window to look out at the slowly lightening sky. John watched her, trying to read her expression, hoping he had not overstepped by making the offer so soon. "My whole life men have tried to tell me what I could and could not do," she said without turning around. "My father, bless him, was kind but traditional. He expected me to marry well and have children, nothing more. After he died, I thought Mother and I would have more freedom in the West. And we did for a while. But then Thomas came along and proved to be just another man who saw women as possessions. And now here you are, offering me genuine choice and autonomy, and I hardly know what to say." "You do not have to say anything tonight," John said gently. "Sleep on it. See how you feel in the morning after you have rested and had time to think clearly. Whatever you decide, you are welcome to stay here until we figure out a more permanent solution to your situation." Faith turned to face him, and he was startled to see tears streaming down her cheeks. But she was smiling through them, a brilliant, joyful expression that transformed her face. "Thank you. You have given me back something I thought I had lost." "What is that?" "My future. The ability to imagine something better instead of just running from something terrible." John rose and crossed to her, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to her. Faith took it and dabbed at her eyes, laughing softly at herself. "I am sorry," she said. "I am not usually so emotional. It has just been a very long night. You have nothing to apologize for. Tears are not weakness. They are just proof that you are still feeling things, which means you have not let the hard times break you." She looked up at him, and they stood close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her green eyes. The air between them felt heavy with possibility, and he found himself swaying slightly toward her before catching himself. Faith noticed, he could tell, because her breath hitched and her pupils dilated. "John," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. "Faith," he replied, equally quiet. For a moment he thought she might close the distance between them, might rise up on her toes and kiss him. Part of him desperately wanted to feel her lips against his and her body pressed close. But a larger part of him knew it was too soon, that she needed time to process everything that had happened before they complicated things further. So instead, he stepped back and gave her space, offering a small smile that he hoped conveyed both his restraint and his interest. "More coffee?" he asked, proud that his voice came out steady. Faith blinked, seeming to come back to herself, and nodded. "Please." They returned to their chairs, but something had shifted between them. The conversation flowed more easily now, punctuated by laughter and teasing that felt natural despite their short acquaintance. Faith told him about a horse she had once trained that was afraid of chickens, describing the elaborate process of desensitization that had eventually allowed the horse to walk past the chicken coop without panicking. John countered with a story about his brother's attempt to ride a cow as a child, which had ended with the cow running through the fence and his brother requiring 3 stitches in his scalp. "You come from a family of 4 boys," Faith said, laughing. "I cannot imagine the chaos." "It was never boring," John agreed. "My mother used to say she aged 10 years for every 1 year of raising us, but we were close, especially the younger 3 of us. The war changed that, scattered us to the winds. My oldest brother stayed in Ohio to run the family farm. The second oldest moved to California to try his luck in business. The youngest, my brother Samuel, was killed at Shiloh. I am so sorry. It was a long time ago, but I still think about him. He was only 19, still had his whole life ahead of him. Sometimes I wonder what he would have become if the war had not taken him." John paused, staring into his coffee. "That is the real cost of war, I think. Not just the lives lost, but all the lives that never got to be lived, all the futures that were stolen. Do you ever see your other brothers?" "Not since I came west. We exchange letters occasionally, but it is not the same as being together. I used to think about going back to Ohio for a visit, but I could never bring myself to leave the ranch for that long. It felt like abandoning Sarah's memory somehow, even though I know that is irrational." "It is not irrational," Faith said. "Grief makes its own kind of sense. You honor her by staying, by maintaining the life you were building together. There is nothing wrong with that." "But maybe it is time to start building something new," John said, surprising himself with the admission. "Sarah would not want me to spend the rest of my life alone, maintaining a shrine to what might have been. She would want me to live fully, to find joy again." "What brings you joy?" He looked at Faith, really looked at her, taking in her intelligent eyes and compassionate expression and the way she leaned forward when she listened, fully engaged in every word. "This," he said honestly. "Sitting here talking to you, making plans for the future, feeling like there is something worth waking up for tomorrow. I had forgotten what that felt like." Faith's expression softened. "You bring me joy too. Is that strange to say when we have only known each other for a few hours?" "If it is strange, then we are both strange, and I am comfortable with that." They smiled at each other, and John felt the last of his defenses crumbling. He had spent 3 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that solitude was safer than connection. But Faith had walked through all those walls as easily as she had walked through his door, and he found he did not want to rebuild them. The clock struck 4, and they both glanced toward the window to see the sky continuing to lighten. It was the deep blue of pre-dawn now, with the stars beginning to fade. Another hour, maybe less, and the sun would crest the eastern mountains and paint the world in gold. "We should probably check on the horses," John said. "And I should show you where you will be sleeping in case you want to rest after sunrise." "I am not tired," Faith said. I feel like I could stay awake forever just talking with you. I feel the same way, but you need rest. You have been through an ordeal tonight." Reluctantly, Faith nodded and stood. John led her down the short hallway to the spare bedroom, a small space that held a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. He lit the lamp on the dresser, illuminating the simple but clean room. "It is not much," he said, "but the bed is comfortable, and you will have privacy." "It is perfect," Faith assured him. "Better than anything I dared hope for when I was running through the darkness earlier." They stood in the doorway, neither quite ready to say good night even though morning was approaching. Finally, Faith reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Thank you again for everything. For opening your door, for listening to me, for seeing me as a person rather than a problem. You have given me back my faith in humanity." "You have given me something too," John said. "You have reminded me that I am still alive, still capable of feeling and hoping and planning for tomorrow. I had forgotten that was possible." Faith smiled, then reluctantly released his hand and stepped into the room. "Good night, John. Or good morning, I suppose." "Good morning, Faith. Sleep well when you finally do sleep." He closed the door gently and stood in the hallway for a moment, his hand still tingling where she had touched it. Then he made his way back to the main room and added another log to the fire, though dawn was near and the house would soon warm on its own. He settled into his chair and tried to think through the practical implications of what he had offered Faith. Taking her in, even temporarily, would complicate his life in ways he had spent 3 years avoiding. But as he sat alone in the quiet house, listening to the sounds of Faith moving around in the guest room as she prepared for sleep, he realized he did not care about the complications. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt fully alive, and no amount of potential trouble was worth giving that up. A soft knock on the door frame made him look up to find Faith standing there, still dressed, her expression uncertain. "I thought I could sleep, but I cannot," she said. "My mind is racing with everything that has happened. Would you mind if I stayed up with you a little longer, at least until we watch the sunrise together?" John felt warmth bloom in his chest. "I would like that very much. Come, sit with me." Faith returned to her chair, pulling the blanket around her shoulders again. "Tell me more about your plans for the ranch. If I were to stay and work with you, what would that look like practically?" They spent the next hour discussing details, building a shared vision of what the ranch could become. John found himself growing animated as he talked, his hands gesturing as he described his ideas for expanding the horse herd and developing a training program. Faith contributed her own suggestions, her knowledge of horse breeding and training adding depth to his more general plans. "We would need at least 3 more stalls in the barn," she said, "and a proper training corral with good footing. Nothing too fancy, but it needs to be safe for both horses and handlers." "I can build that," John said. "I have the lumber stored in the barn already. I bought it last year thinking I would expand but never got around to it." "We would also need to develop a reputation," Faith continued. "People need to know that we can handle difficult horses and produce reliable results. That means taking on some challenging cases at first, probably for reduced fees, to prove what we can do. I know a few ranchers who have problem horses they would let us work with. And word of mouth travels fast in this territory. If we can show success with a few difficult animals, we will have more business than we can handle within 6 months." They talked through the practicalities until the sky outside the window began to glow with the first hints of dawn. John rose and offered Faith his hand. "Come with me. I know the perfect place to watch the sunrise." Faith took his hand without hesitation, and he led her through the kitchen and out the back door. The morning air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and sage. He guided her to a small rise behind the house where he had built a simple bench, and they sat down side by side, their shoulders almost touching. The eastern sky was ablaze with color now, deep purples and brilliant oranges streaking across the horizon. The mountains stood in dark silhouette against the light, and the first rays of sun touched the highest peaks, turning them gold. "Oh," Faith breathed, "it is beautiful." "This is my favorite time of day," John said quietly. "Everything feels new at sunrise, like the world is starting fresh. All the mistakes of yesterday are behind you, and anything is possible." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun continued its steady climb, spreading light across the valley below. John was intensely aware of Faith beside him, the warmth of her presence and the soft sound of her breathing. He wanted to put his arm around her shoulders, to pull her close and share his warmth, but he held back, content for now just to be near her. "John," Faith said eventually, her voice soft in the morning stillness. "Yes, I want to stay. Not just for a few days while we figure out what to do about Thomas and Victor Harding, but really stay. I want to be your partner, to help you build something worthwhile here, if you meant what you said about wanting that." John turned to look at her, seeing the hope and vulnerability in her expression. "I meant every word, but are you sure? You have only known me for one night." "I have learned more about you in one night of honest conversation than I learned about Thomas in 2 years of living in his house," Faith said. "I trust my instincts, and they are telling me that this is right, that you are right." "Then stay," John said simply. "Stay and let us see what we can build together." Faith smiled, radiant in the growing light, and John felt something shift inside him, a door opening onto possibilities he had thought lost forever. On impulse, he reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. She squeezed back, her grip firm and sure. They sat together on the bench as the sun rose fully above the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. The night had passed, but neither of them felt the loss. Instead, they felt only anticipation for what the new day might bring. In the weeks that followed, Faith proved to be everything John had hoped and more. She moved into the spare room and immediately set about making herself useful, working alongside him to expand the barn and build the training corral. Her knowledge of horses was even more extensive than she had indicated, and John found himself learning from her as much as she learned from him. They worked together from dawn until dusk, falling into an easy rhythm that felt natural despite their short acquaintance. Faith began working with Smoke, the difficult stallion, approaching him with patience and calm that gradually broke through his fear. John watched her work with quiet admiration, seeing the gift she had described in action, as she coaxed the frightened horse to trust again. In the evenings, they ate dinner together and talked long into the night, building on the foundation they had established during that first conversation. They shared their hopes and fears, their memories and dreams, learning each other in the way that only happens when two people are genuinely interested in understanding one another. Faith wrote to the Reverend in town, explaining her situation and asking for his help in dealing with Thomas and Victor Harding legally. The Reverend, true to John's prediction, proved to be an ally. He helped Faith understand her limited legal options and agreed to stand as a witness if needed. He also quietly spread word among the townspeople that Faith was under John's protection, which discouraged Thomas from showing up at the ranch to drag her back. Victor Harding, furious at losing his promised bride, made threatening noises but took no direct action. He was wealthy enough to have his pick of women, and ultimately his pride was more injured than his heart. Thomas, facing social censure for his treatment of his stepdaughter and the loss of Harding's financial support, sold his ranch and left Colorado Territory entirely. The Reverend helped Faith file legal papers declaring herself independent once she turned 21, which happened 3 months after she arrived at John's ranch. But while the external threats gradually resolved themselves, the emotional situation between John and Faith grew more complicated. They were falling in love, both of them knew it, but neither quite dared to speak it aloud. John worried that Faith might feel obligated to him because he had helped her, that she might confuse gratitude for deeper feelings. Faith worried that John was not ready to move past Sarah's memory, that she might be asking him to give his heart before he was ready. So they danced around their feelings, expressing them through small gestures instead of words. John brought Faith wildflowers from the meadow. Faith baked his favorite foods and mended his worn shirts. They found excuses to touch each other, hands brushing as they passed tools, shoulders bumping as they worked side by side. The air between them grew thick with unspoken longing, and more than once, John caught Faith watching him with an expression that made his heart race. It all came to a head one evening in late summer, nearly 6 months after Faith had knocked on his door. They had just finished training a particularly difficult mare that a rancher had brought them, and they stood together in the corral watching the horse move calmly around the space, no longer shying at every movement. "You did beautifully with her," John said. "That horse was half wild when she arrived, and now look at her, steady as can be." "We did beautifully," Faith corrected. "I could not have done it without your help building her trust. You have a gentle hand with animals, John. I hope you know that." They stood close together, both leaning on the corral fence, and John felt the familiar pull toward her that had become a constant ache in his chest. He was tired of holding back, tired of being careful. Life was short. He had learned that lesson too well, and spending it pretending he did not love Faith seemed like a waste of the precious time they had. "Faith," he said quietly, turning to face her. "Can I tell you something?" She turned as well, her green eyes searching his face. "Of course." "I love you." The words came out simply, without any of the poetry he had imagined using when he finally confessed his feelings. "I know it has only been 6 months, and I know we agreed to be partners first before anything else, but I cannot keep pretending that this is just business. Every day I fall more in love with you, and if I do not tell you soon, I think I might burst from holding it in." Faith's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, John feared he had misread everything, that she would tell him gently that she cared for him, but not in that way. But then a slow smile spread across her face, brilliant as the sunrise they had watched together that first morning. "I love you too," she said. "I have loved you since that first night, I think. Certainly since we watched the sun come up together. But I was afraid to say anything, afraid you might not be ready." Relief and joy flooded through John in equal measure. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "I am ready. Sarah will always be part of my past, and I will always love the memory of her. But you are my present and my future, if you will have me. I want to build a life with you, not just a business, but a real life. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to face whatever comes together, as partners and as lovers, and if you are willing, as husband and wife." "Are you proposing?" Faith asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I am. I do not have a ring yet, and this is not very romantic, standing in a dusty corral surrounded by horses, but I cannot wait another moment. Faith Drummond, will you marry me?" Faith laughed and cried at the same time, tears streaming down her cheeks even as she smiled wide enough to hurt. "Yes. Yes. Absolutely yes." John pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, feeling her heart beating against his. Then he tilted her face up and kissed her, softly at first and then with growing passion as she kissed him back. It was everything he had imagined and more, her lips soft and eager, her body fitting perfectly against his. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Faith was still smiling. "I love you, John Oakley. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see me as an equal. I love how you make me laugh and how safe I feel with you. I want to build this life with you, raise horses and maybe children if we are blessed. I want everything with you." "Then you shall have it," John promised. "All of it, for as long as I live." They married a month later in the small church in Florissant, with the reverend officiating and a handful of friends in attendance. Faith wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, and John wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. It was not a grand affair, but it was perfect, full of genuine love and joy. The reverend's wife cried happy tears throughout the ceremony, delighted that her quiet worry about John's loneliness had been resolved so beautifully. The friends who had served with John in the war clapped him on the back and welcomed Faith into their small circle. And when John and Faith exchanged their vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring, there was not a dry eye in the church. They honeymooned at the ranch, spending a week focused only on each other and the new dimension their relationship had taken on. John had worried that the physical aspect of marriage might be awkward given his long celibacy and Faith's inexperience, but they learned each other with the same patience and care they brought to training horses. Faith proved to be passionate and unafraid, and John found joy in discovering what pleased her. In the quiet moments between lovemaking, they talked about the future they would build together. They planned expansions to the ranch, discussed how many children they might want, and dreamed about the legacy they would leave. John told Faith about his brothers and promised to take her to Ohio someday to meet them. Faith described her memories of her mother and said she hoped their children would inherit her mother's gentle spirit. Life settled into a comfortable pattern after the wedding. They worked the ranch together, their horse training program growing in reputation and success. Within a year, they had enough business that they hired 2 young men from town to help with the general ranch work, freeing Faith to focus entirely on horse training while John managed the business side of operations. Faith transformed the house into a true home, adding curtains to the windows and rugs to the floors, filling the rooms with warmth and life. She planted a garden and learned to cook the foods John loved best. And John, in turn, learned to anticipate Faith's needs and moods, knowing when she needed space to work through a problem alone and when she needed his arms around her for comfort. They had their disagreements, of course. 2 strong-willed people living and working together constantly were bound to clash occasionally. But they learned to talk through their conflicts rather than letting resentment fester, and they always made sure to go to bed on good terms, remembering that life was too short and too precious to waste on anger. 14 months after their wedding, Faith discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with a mixture of joy and terror, but mostly joy. John became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Faith from doing any heavy work, despite her insistence that she was pregnant, not ill. They argued about it good-naturedly, until Faith threatened to train the most difficult horse they had ever received just to prove she was still capable. After that, John learned to step back and trust her judgment about what she could and could not handle. Their son was born on a cold January morning, arriving healthy and loud after a labor that terrified John but which Faith endured with remarkable strength. They named him Samuel, after John's brother who had died in the war. And from the moment John held his son for the first time, he knew his heart had expanded in ways he had not known were possible. Faith proved to be a natural mother, somehow managing to care for a newborn while still running her horse training program with hardly a break. John marveled at her strength and competence, falling more in love with her every day as he watched her navigate motherhood with the same grace she brought to everything else. Samuel was followed 3 years later by a daughter they named Sarah, after John's first wife. It had been Faith's suggestion, and it touched John deeply that she wanted to honor his past that way. Little Sarah had her mother's green eyes and dark hair, and she was as gentle with animals as her namesake had been. 2 more children followed in the years after, another son named Thomas and a daughter named Grace. The house that had once been so quiet and lonely rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing. John built additions onto the structure to accommodate their growing family, and Faith filled each room with love and care. The ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams. Their reputation for training difficult horses spread throughout Colorado territory and beyond, bringing them clients from as far away as Kansas and Wyoming. They expanded their operation several times, eventually employing a dozen workers and training upwards of 50 horses a year. But more than the material success, what filled John with gratitude every day was the life he shared with Faith. They still made time to talk long into the night, just the two of them, continuing the conversation they had started during those early morning hours when she first knocked on his door. They still watched sunrises together when they could, sitting on the bench behind the house and marveling at the gift of another day. On their 10th wedding anniversary, John gave Faith a locket containing a photograph of their family. She cried happy tears and told him it was the most precious gift she had ever received. That evening, after the children were in bed, they sat together by the fire just as they had on that first night. "You ever regret it?" John asked, holding Faith close against his side. "Running to my door that night. You could have had a safer, easier life if you had just accepted what Thomas wanted for you." Faith looked up at him with an expression of such love and contentment that it took his breath away. "Never. Not for one single moment. That night I chose freedom and uncertainty over safety and misery, and it led me to you. It led me to this life, these children, this home we have built together. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." "I am grateful every day that you knocked on my door," John said. "You saved me as surely as I saved you. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. You brought me back to life, Faith. You gave me back my future." "We saved each other," Faith said softly. "And we built something beautiful from the ashes of our old lives. That is what love does, I think. It takes broken pieces and makes them into something new and whole." They kissed, still as passionate as they had been in the early days of their courtship, still as eager for each other's touch. The fire burned low in the hearth, and outside the window the stars wheeled across the Colorado sky, just as they had on that long-ago night when a desperate woman had knocked on a lonely man's door and changed both their lives forever. Years passed, bringing the challenges and joys that all lives contain. There were hard winters when they worried about the livestock and hot summers when water ran scarce. There were illnesses that frightened them and accidents that tested their strength. But through it all, John and Faith faced each obstacle together, drawing on the deep well of love and trust they had built during that first night of conversation. Their children grew, each developing their own talents and interests. Samuel proved to have a gift for working with horses almost equal to his mother's, and he eventually took over much of the training program. Sarah, quiet and studious, became a teacher in Florissant, educating the next generation. Thomas showed a head for business and managed the ranch's financial affairs. And Grace, the baby, surprised them all by becoming a skilled blacksmith, learning the trade from the man they employed to shoe their horses. As John and Faith entered their later years, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting their children and employees to maintain what they had built. They spent more time together, just the two of them, returning to the simple pleasure of each other's company that had defined their early relationship. On a morning in late spring, when John was 65 and Faith was 57, they sat together on the bench behind the house watching another sunrise paint the mountains gold. John's hair was white now, and his hands were gnarled with arthritis. Faith's face showed the lines of age and experience, but to John she was as beautiful as the day he had opened his door to find her standing there. "You remember that first night?" Faith asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Every moment of it," John said. "The sound of you knocking, the fear in your eyes, the way you ate that cold chicken like you had not seen food in days, the way we talked until sunrise, discovering each other word by word. We have had a good life, have we not? The best life I could have imagined. Better than I deserved." Faith reached for his hand, her grip still firm despite the years. "We deserved every moment of happiness we found, John Oakley. We earned it by choosing each other every single day, even when it would have been easier to walk away." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, warming their faces. Around them, the ranch they had built together hummed with activity. In the corrals, their grandchildren were already working with the horses, continuing the tradition Faith had established decades before. In the house behind them, they could hear the sounds of breakfast being prepared by the housekeeper they now employed to help with the work that had grown too difficult for them. "What do you think happens next?" Faith asked. "After all this, I do not know," John admitted. "But whatever it is, I hope we face it together, just like we have faced everything else." "Always together," Faith agreed, "in this life and whatever comes after." They watched the sunrise for a while longer, then made their way slowly back to the house, hands clasped, supporting each other as they had for more than 30 years. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witness to the love story that had begun one desperate night and grown into something that would outlast them both. John died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, with Faith holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed. His last words were her name, spoken with love and gratitude. Faith lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and the legacy of the life she and John had built together. On the morning of her death, her granddaughter found her sitting on the bench behind the house, facing east toward the mountains, a peaceful smile on her face as if she was watching one final sunrise. The ranch continued for generations after them, managed by their descendants who honored the partnership and love that had founded it. The story of how John and Faith met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The bench where they watched sunrises together was carefully maintained, a memorial to a love that had started with 3 desperate knocks on a door at midnight and grown into something that changed the course of many lives. In the churchyard in Florissant, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of John Oakley and Faith Oakley. The inscription on Faith's stone, chosen by their children, read simply, "She knocked after midnight, he opened the door, together they watched the sunrise." And though their bodies returned to the Colorado earth they had worked and loved, their story lived on, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the connections that can form when 2 lonely souls find each other in the darkness and choose to wait together for the light.